Right, Ritual. So second part of that essay question, we're going to look at public sector control. All right, this is still the same essay question as the previous lesson. Okay, it's all one essay question. Okay, sometimes we said the government interventions, all the interventions that we discussed in the previous lesson, sometimes those interventions don't always achieve the desired outcomes. The interventions that we looked at was the marketable permits, the charging for the environment, the granting of the property rights, the taxes, the subsidies. Those are all interventions that the government can use to help the market to achieve environmental sustainability. But sometimes those interventions do not have the desired outcome and it doesn't work, basically. It doesn't work to create sustainability when we use the environment. And in cases like that, the government takes direct control. All right. So 3 things that we are going to look at for public sector control. We are going to look at command and control. We're going to look at the voluntary agreements, and we're going to look at education. Okay. So there's 3 ways that the government can take control of the situation and create environmental sustainability. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to look at is called command and control, or CAC. Okay, and this means that they are going to set maximum permitted levels of pollution, okay, or resource usage or whatever. Okay, so what they can do here is they can literally set a maximum permitted level of CO2 emissions. Okay, so in other words, they're going to say what level of CO2 emissions is acceptable, and that is the maximum. And then nobody, no consumer, no producer is allowed to exceed the maximum permitted level of emissions. They do it often in case of resource usage, all right, where people are limited in terms of what resources they are allowed to use. Okay, in terms of fishing, I said many times before, our fishing resources are under pressure. So literally there's limitations as to which fishes are allowed to be taken out, how many we are allowed to take out per day or per year or per month or whatever. Okay, so they regulate the amount of resources that we are allowed to remove from nature where such resources are under pressure. Or they can also permit, or they can set a level that is the minimum acceptable level of environmental quality. So if they measure, for example, the water quality, what is the minimal acceptable level of water quality? What is the minimum quality that the water is supposed to have? The minimum level of cleanliness that the water is supposed to have. All right. And then obviously they appoint inspectors to monitor these activities and then to impose fines if those limits are not respected. All right. If you go to the sea, for example, where like St. Lucia, Sodwana, where the fishermen go, that they go out on the boat for the day to fish. At the end of the day, you will see there's environmental inspectors that is walking around on the beach. As the boats exit the water, they literally approach the boats with their badges and everything, and then they ask to see the catch of the day. Then they see that the fishes that was taken out is not species that are prohibited. They measure them to see that they are of a certain size, because if it's too small, they're not allowed to take them out. They count how many fishes is on that boat, right, to make sure that people are not exceeding the limit of what they are allowed to do. All right. So there's literally people that are following up. It doesn't help that we make a rule, that we set a limit, and then we don't check up on these limits. So there are inspectors that have been appointed that will monitor these activities to make sure that people are literally sticking to the limits that is imposed on them. All right, and then anybody that exceeds the limit, if you brought out a fish that is a baby fish, it's too small, you were supposed to throw it back, you will receive a fine. Okay, they can also confiscate the stuff if you did not stick to the limits that they have imposed on you. All right, so most of the developed countries have regulations of some kind that in terms of the pollution, what is acceptable levels of air and water pollution, noise, the usage of dangerous chemicals, waste management, new projects. Now, how's that going to affect the people, the environment, recycling, the ozone layer, global warming? There's a lot of regulations. Command and control means that the government is going to make regulations. All right. For example, what is allowed and not allowed in terms of pollution, noise pollution in residential areas. You are not allowed to play loud music after, I think it's 10 o'clock at night. Okay. There's a regulation. It's a regulation. You can physically call the police and complain that your neighbors are being noisy after 10 o'clock. All right. So there's certain regulations, certain laws that have been passed in terms of how we deal with certain aspects of where we interact with the environment. Okay, so 3 approaches to command and control. The quantity standards. Okay, so in terms of quantity, the focus is on the amount of pollution that is caused. Okay, so we don't physically look at the impact on the environment necessarily. We're going to look at the amount of pollution that is being caused. All right, so as technology changes, as our technology gets better, these standards could be made higher. Now we impose higher standards because we assume that we have better technology available, that people should be using the new technology to minimize their pollution. All right. Then if they look at the quality standards, here the focus is going to be on the impact on the environment. Okay, so for example, here they can set a standard for air and water purity. As I said, they literally measure the quality of the water in a municipal area, and municipalities in South Africa can literally qualify for blue drop status on account of the purity of their tap water, so how clean their water. Now, the highest standard is that blue drop status. Now, in Mogale City, our water is blue drop status, which means that the water that is coming through our taps are very, very clean. Yeah, there's very little contaminants in there, etc., etc. Yeah, the quality of the water is good. And then in terms of the social impact, they measure the focus is on the effect that it has on people. All right, so for example, tougher standards, a higher standard for noise levels will be imposed in areas that are more densely populated. In the cities where there's lots of people, they will apply the standard more stricter, because more people are going to be affected by one noisy idiot than because there's lots of people in the area. All right, so they can focus either on the amount of pollution that is being caused, or the impact of the pollution on the environment, how severe the impact is, or the impact that it has on people. All right, and the second control measure that the government can get into is voluntary agreements. Okay, so this obviously also works sometimes a little bit better than imposing a law and regulation. When the government enters into voluntary agreements with businesses, if businesses enter into a voluntary agreement, they are more likely to stick to the agreement, okay, because it is an agreement between the government and the businesses. They agree on what is acceptable and what is not. Okay, so these voluntary agreements could involve a formal contract, okay, so it would be legally binding, or it can just be a more informal commitment made by business. It's a gentleman's agreement that the business enters into with the government. All right, and obviously, as I said, businesses prefer to enter into voluntary agreements because it's not forced onto them, and then they can negotiate the agreement to obviously suit their particular situation. All right, and they are prepared for it. They can build them into their planning. And then lastly, in terms of education, obviously the attitude of the people in the country is very important to determine the environmental consequences of their actions. So as we said, sometimes people pollute or people create environmental damage not intentionally, but by accident because they don't know any better. All right, and this is where education is going to come in. So if children and adults were made more aware of environmental issues and the consequences of their actions, we might have more success in terms of their actions changing to become environmentally more friendly. So because people don't know that plastic is bad for the environment, they might throw a lot of plastics away and they won't recycle, etc., etc. But if we spend time and we educate people, whether they're adults, whether they're children, we find ways of educating them, and we actually have to just inform them of the negative consequences that their actions have. They might not know that what they are doing is creating damage to the environment. So if we educate them and we give them the knowledge, they might actually change their habits. All right, so education obviously plays a major role in improving people's capacity to manage their environment. If they understand what they are doing wrong, if they realize that they are doing something wrong, they might change their behavior. All right, so throughout the developing countries, there's a wide range of approaches that can be used to educate people. Okay, so for example, community wildlife reserves that is managed for sports hunting have been transformed into areas that is managed for conservation. So areas that people used to go to in order to hunt the animals, kill them, consume them, we convert those areas instead of being a hunting ground for sports hunters. We convert it into a conservation area where people can go and learn about the animals and observe the animals in their natural environment rather than killing them. All right. Households have become more conscious of the importance of waste recycling. Okay, there's a lot of households that separate their waste. The non-recyclable stuff goes in the rubbish bin for the municipality to collect, and then we recycle that which we can. All right, so we are reducing the amount of solid waste that we are dumping in the environment because we are now recycling. But years ago, we didn't realize that recycling was important, but people are becoming more and more conscious of recycling. Okay, then there's also cooperatives that have been established to produce organic food for both domestic and international markets. You will see if you buy stuff at certain shops, Woolworths specifically, it will say organic. On the label, it will say organic or free range, whatever, which means that no dangerous chemicals have been used in the cultivation of the fruits or the vegetables or whatever. It is organic. So the production method was more environmentally friendly and has less of an impact on the environment. Okay, and then also obviously there are those pressure groups, the nature freaks, Green Party, Greenpeace, Friends of the Earth. They use their bargaining power to force businesses, to encourage them to integrate environmental responsibility into all of their decision making. The focus is on creating awareness. We need to create awareness. We need to tell people that what you are doing is not sustainable. We need to show them the correct ways of doing things, and then we can maybe change people's behavior. All right, and that's the end of this